Hello everyone, it's your Peacekeeper, and it's time to indulge myself in a little bit of World of Warships drama, so to speak. As many of you guys know, Wargaming has proposed that they want to change how battleship armor piercing works against destroyers by basically eliminating the ability for battleship armor piercing to achieve a normal penetrating hit against said destroyer. Apparently, Wargaming thinks that battleships are too good right now against DDs, which begs the question, why do you keep buffing battleships while nerfing destroyers? I digress. Anyway, that's a discussion for another day. So there are a number of arguments against battleships being able to do normal penetrating hits that range from game balance related issues to realism issues. So let's dive into what I think is probably the most common arguments against or for this change. One of the most common arguments that I hear is, well, in real life, battleships would never fire armor piercing at destroyers. And while I can't find any evidence that the statement is true, I also can't find any evidence that the statement is false. It certainly would make sense. However, what I do know is that just about every time a US battleship fired at a destroyer, it was either with their secondary battery, those 5-inch 38 caliber guns, or it was with whatever was loaded in the tubes. And I'm using the US here because they have a little bit better and more complete battle records than other nations do, and so we got a lot more information available to us. Probably the most notable case of this is Iowa and New Jersey attempting to run down the Japanese destroyer Milwaukee at Truck, and at the time what they had loaded was high capacity rounds, which is what Wargaming calls high explosive. Why did they shoot high capacity rounds at them? Well, two reasons. At Truck, their mission included land targets, and they don't shoot armor piercing at land targets unless it's an armored land target, which none of them were. And two, because most of the ships that were there were relatively thin-skinned ships like the Japanese training cruiser Katori, and of course her escorts like Milwaukee. So that kind of sounds like I'm supporting the idea that they would have never have shot AP at them to begin with, right? Well, let's look at this a little bit closer. Generally speaking, real-life battles did not happen 20 minutes at a time with zero pre-planning, and the time between contact, positioning, and engagement could be days at the longest or hours at the shortest. Ships moved into position and engaged other warships on what would be considered a leisurely pace compared to what we have in-game. Now, there are several examples, though, like in the Battle of the Solomons, in which battles happened at a frantic pace due to ships being truthfully ambushed. And even then, you're still going to fire what was loaded in the barrels. I mean, this is the perfect example of this is look at Kiroshima's battle with South Dakota and Washington. Hiroshima was loaded for short bombardment duty when she ran into the South Dakota at point-blank range. She fired Type 3 shells, which are an anti-aircraft shell that they also use for bombardment purposes, as well as high-capacity shells at South Dakota, because that's what was loaded up in the tubes, in the barrels themselves, as well as up in the ammunition hoist at the time. When they ran through those shells, they finally switched to armor piercing, and by that time it was a little too late. She'd already been hit several times by Washington at that point, and what shells did actually impact South Dakota went clean through, owing in large part to Japanese shell fuses, the fuses being way longer than other nations because they were trying to get those, plunging shots. Well, does that sound familiar to anyone? I mean, that's exactly what we have in game right now. You know, when a destroyer pops up in front of your battleship, the last thing you're going to do is go, I'm going to sit here and not shoot at the thing. And the reasons for that? Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. We're not done with realism yet, though. While it's true that battleship armor piercing would either not fuse on the hull of a DD or go clean through it and explode on the other side, there were still angles at which a shell could hit and detonate inside the ship, devastatingly, I might add. This is borne out in the game, with ships being required to angle, or the shells being required to hit something hard to get a normal penetrating hit. In fact, the vast majority of times that I have actually achieved a normal penetrating hit on a destroyer is in a situation in which they are angled just enough that the shell, when it detonates inside the hull of the ship, which is exactly what the normal penetrating hit is for. This is a gameplay related issue due to the quality, and oh boy, this is probably going to get some steam rolling here, but this is more of a gameplay related issue than anything. And in fact, here right in the middle of this match, we're going to see a perfect example of aiming at something that was armored. Yes, we just dev struck a Yugamo by aiming at his turret. That one normal penetration was at the turret. That was the most heavily armored place on that ship. Anywho, you know, that's a gameplay issue. One, by automatically turning everything into overpens, we're removing any hope of skill playing into the match, which I think is a terrible idea. Just from a gameplay standpoint, anytime we water down the game to try and, you know, cater to certain gameplay, I think really muddies the water on what is considered good gameplay, and I really don't think that it's appropriate from a gameplay standpoint. I don't think it's fun either. It takes away skill requirements and all that, but on the other token to this is the best defense for a destroyer is their speeds and stealth, which in terms of gameplay style, when is a destroyer going to be at point blank range to a battleship to where this engagement's actually going to happen? Well, I say that after, you know, we're in the middle of our How to Play series on the Russian destroyer line, and, well, yeah, that's definitely a line that suffers from the case of short-range torpedo-itis, and absolutely has to, you know, close into that distance in order to use their torpedoes. That's not a bad thing. Just, you know, something to remember, though, is that's one line, and there are tactics that can be used to mitigate incoming damage while doing that. A good player is going to be able to pull that off regardless of whether or not a battleship is looking at them, regardless of whether or not a battleship is going to normally penetrate them. Generally speaking, and my videos have borne it out, the only time at which I've actually done that is during, you know, like the early parts of the match where I have a lot of hit points to soak up all of that damage. At that point, it's not going to matter. Furthermore, by the time I switch ammo to high explosive, that DD will have most likely disappeared. Unless he's charging me, at which point, the last thing I'm going to do is sit there and be completely defenseless and wait for my horribly inaccurate secondaries, which may or may not even be paying attention at the time. I mean, drunk sailors and all that. And waiting for them to actually do their job. I mean, I'm not going to sit there. I'm gonna shoot at them with whatever's loaded in the tube. That goes back to our, you know, Kirishima argument during the, you know, the realism part of this. Second, well, going back to this first part, you know, you're going to have to run expert loader in order to switch in a reasonable time frame. Well, that's a wasted point in my book because of the next reason, which is that 10% damage overpens still add up really fast. 13,700 damage is how much a Citadel hit from a U.S. battleship firing a Mark 8 super heavy AP shell. So, North Carolina, South Dakota, Iowa, Montana. Now, Iowa and Montana actually have that value. I think it's 13,200 for South Dakota and North Carolina due to the shorter barrels. Wargaming can justify that however they want. It's the same exact shell. Either way, 10% of that is still 1,300 damage. 1,300 damage is a lot when your destroyer has a hit point pool of less than 20,000 hit points. It doesn't take anything for that to add up into a lot of damage. You know, your average number of overpens when you fire at a destroyer at those close ranges where you get surprised, usually about 3. 3 overpens is roughly 4,000 damage. Yeah, that's 20% of a destroyer with 20,000 hit points. 20% of their hit points just gone, and they'll never get it back because even if it was a Russian destroyer with the ability to heal, you know, chances are that you're not going to be able to heal all that back. In fact, you won't be able to heal all that back, but furthermore, you're probably going to die if you're that close to something and they have, you know, escorts and they're actually paying attention. So it's not really going to matter. And if you're close enough to that, a ship like the North Carolina, which has inordinately accurate guns at close ranges, and when, you know, shells are aimed properly, not like that salvo, oi. it's not going to matter. You're going to get more than that in terms of overpens. It's not going to stop a ship like the Montana, which has 12 barrels, or the Grosser Kurfürst, which has 12 barrels, from absolutely annihilating a destroyer at close ranges. It's just not going to go away. So you've not actually solved the problem. And I know I've said this before, but I'm never going to switch. I mean, you're never going to get me to switch. The situations that I would actually switch to high explosive are so narrow and limited that you might as well just not even... I might as well not even bring up the situations, because it's really a waste of time to explain those situations. It's basically one situation at all. And it's, like I said, it's not worth talking about. I'm just going to shoot AP pretty much all the time. If they remove the ability to do, you know, normal penetrating hits against destroyers, I'm still not going to switch, because 3 hits of high explosive is like, what, 6k? But I gotta wait 15, 30 seconds in order to actually use it. Yep. Not going to actually do that, because that number doesn't add up. In fact, by the time I had reloaded, I would be halfway through my second salvo, so if he was still around 15 seconds later when my HE finally came up and I finally did my 6,000 damage to him, I've already done 4k to him. I'd much rather just have the, you know, shoot the 4k at him, maybe he'll run away. And I think that's the problem that Wargaming is really struggling with. I don't think they truthfully understand this, and I'm going to agree with Notzer on this. The unintended consequence of this is going to yield gameplay that I think is, quite frankly, toxic to the way that this game should be played. I don't think the idea of battleships spamming HE is a good thing to add to this game. I think it actually, again, takes away player skill, and the emphasis on player skill is, in my opinion, it's more rewarding from a gameplay standpoint. I don't think that we should be catering to, you know, the bottom denominator. And I don't mean that to sound elitist or anything like that. It's just, I get so frustrated when we try and take away and levelize player skill rather than helping people get better, which is why I have this YouTube channel. I want to allow people to get better, you know? That's just me. Anyway, this has been kind of my ideas on Battleship AP. Let me know down in the comments if you guys agree with me, disagree with me. I'm curious to hear from you guys and what you guys think. I know the battle video wasn't terribly interesting, but it had my dev strike on that Yugamo that I wanted to show. But let me know down in the comments what you guys thought. I'm your Peacekeeper. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for watching.